A Fulbright scholarship was created to have Americans go to foreign countries to teach and or do research. And I chose to go to Ghana. You apply in a mass application. It's done online. Then the State Department reviews, does a first cut, and then a group at the country you apply to that consists of State Department officials and local universities, they do the second cut. And I made both cuts, and for one semester. You generally there for a full year. My research is in the United States and Africa, United States and the Caribbean, and I was considering a couple different places, but I knew people in Ghana. I've been there before to do some research, and I knew that the National Archives are pretty untouched and have plenty of material. And I copied 10 or so thousand pages of documents from the archive. And then I taught a graduate level class on American history and historical works, and two undergraduate classes on the United States and Russia. It's very much a self-starter thing. You're self-selected. You choose the country you want to apply to. You fill out the forms. Rosie gave me some advice on things, but when people do this, it's pretty much an individual thing. And we've had a couple of Fulbright scholars come to the university. My wife, Sarah Waters, in the music department, she brought Benjamin Ayeti from Ghana, and that was one of my connections there. And he taught drumming and dance here for a full year. And so the fact that that was successful, no doubt, also helped. Professors were good, and the students, I enjoyed teaching with them, and it's the first time I've been applauded at the end of a class since about 1989, so that was a good feeling. The people at the archive were really good, very helpful. The other Fulbright professors in other disciplines were a lot of fun and made a nice community. The people at the embassy were great. Maya Parker was our conduit there, and she was always on top of things. So there are a lot of really good memories, and I was there during the cooler time of the year too, so another important.
For PRSSA, they have one professional advisor and one national faculty advisor, and this is my first year serving as the national faculty advisor in that capacity. This will be my first of a 2-year term, so as I complete that entire first year, I've got to know a lot of wonderful PR students across the world, actually, because PRSSA has around 11,000 students across the nation and a couple of our global chapters, and these students are just really excited and really passionate about PRSSA, so it's really nice being the national faculty advisor and getting to interact with them and make some of the decisions on the national level and how we want to see that organization proceed. So for PRSSA, our chapter was awarded the Star Chapter for the 9th year in a row, which ONU is one of 2 schools that have got that award since the inception of the award, so that's pretty exciting. And they also were awarded a Chapter T-Hand, which there's 9 Chapter T-Hands awarded nationally at International Conference in October, and Ohio Northern was lucky enough to get one of those, and we're really proud of that one as well. One of the things I've been blessed with, along with my colleague Dr. Fleck, and also a colleague out of Belmont University, is the NACU grant. And this is a faculty development grant. This is the first year that we were able to apply for it through NACU. And the three of us are going to be making videos for PRSSA about firms and how to run those and some of the best practices with that. I've also been awarded the Walt Siefkert Award for Central Ohio PRSA, and that's an award given to any member of the association who's given some time and effort and some extra patience to PRSSA. And they give out one of those awards each year, and I was lucky enough to get that.
About 4 years ago, we started to see kids who were abusing pain pills, prescription pain pills, for the first time ever. And we wanted to start to address that. One of the final sort of tipping points of the whole thing, one of the first kids that was using pain pills in the juvenile court, she died of a heroin overdose with a fentanyl adulterated. Yeah, she left behind a baby and everything. She was 14 or 15 when we first found out she was taking pain pills to get high. And then when she graduated from the program, decided I'm on my own, she moved over to Fort Wayne and died of a overdose. And 90% of the people who use heroin take pain pills first. So what we wanted to see is if we could get in front of the heroin epidemic with this generation. 95% of the kids that use pain pills have symptoms of a serious mental illness. So they are likely self-medicating by taking these opioids. So what we recommend first is that the court screen kids for both mental health challenges and substance abuse at the same time. We find that these kids have a high degree of family dysfunction, that there's conflicts in the home, and they're trying to avoid the home. So what we want to do is bring the whole family into the case planning in juvenile court. That if we don't help the parents get the help they need, these kids are going to keep doing what they're doing. We went from no kids involved with opioids to 1 in 4 cases within about a year window. So we're just trying to catch up.
I have a very deep interest and a very strong interest in understanding what the athlete goes through when he or she is exposed to an extreme environment. It just so happens that the athletes that I look at are race car drivers. The idea to look at race car drivers came a very long time ago. I have been a lifelong fan of motorsports. I've been a lifelong fan of racing. And as I was doing my own academic work, my master's degree, my doctorate, and as I got into the literature, I realized that no one was really looking at this group of athletes. Nobody was really examining them or measuring them or really paying any attention to them.
Right.
Because, well, people don't really think that race car drivers are athletes when in fact they actually are. And so the goal of the work from the very beginning has been to uncover and quantify what the driver athlete is experiencing in the cockpit during the course of competition. And once we learn that, we can start to develop interventions, we can start to develop training protocols, we can start to make the driver safer, and we can start to make the driver better from a performance perspective, just like everybody's done for traditional athletes. But when I go away and bring all that data back, I try to involve my students in it. And on some occasions, I've been able to take my students with me to expose them to this kind of environment.
My research in many ways is kind of disconnected from the classes that I teach because I'm more into the interpersonal communication and organizational communication. But my research lies in the video game area, and I really kind of hit two different areas when it comes to video game research. So the first that I started with my dissertation looked at industry level analysis. And at that level, what I'm interested in is figuring out, okay, what are the business models that video game companies use, as well as the use of what we call planned obsolescence, or having a product where there's a limited lifespan in order to generate sales. The other area that I'm also interested in, probably a little bit more so, is looking at media effects from video games. Within that, I look at issues of representation, including gender, race, how parenting and fatherhood's represented. I have a chapter coming out later this year that actually looks at how fatherhood is represented within one of the more popular games over the past 2 years called The Last of Us, that was on PlayStation. And the short answer to that question is yes, video games cause violence, but that's not the entire question, or rather the entire answer. It's much more nuanced than that. So, do video games cause young people to go out and pick up a gun and start shooting up a school or any place else? And the answer to that is no. The research does not show a strong connection between those. When there is a violent result, it tends to be very short-lived. So, take for instance, you've got a 10-year-old kid at home, and he's been playing a game and he's been really into it, and his mom interrupts him and asks him to do one of his chores. The kid snips at his mom, and there's a violent tendency with that, if you will. It's at least aggressive. That's the type of result we typically see. Once a child has stopped playing, then the violent tendency tends to subside. I've been a gamer for as long as I can remember. I am now 55 years old, and I remember having one of the handheld Mattel football games when I was probably about a freshman in high school. This is before consoles had really started coming out too much. Maybe the original Atari. And I received that actually on Christmas Eve, and I stayed up all night playing it, and there's all these beeps and noises. Drove my parents nuts. But I loved it, and that's really kind of where I got my start.
Well, when I started thinking about our graduates, they're predominantly white. They're just like the rest of the teaching field, at least 80%, if not more. When they leave Ohio Northern and they go out and teach, if they're in a really diverse setting, really quickly they see that there are some things that they had not understood about teaching that had to do with the way race and culture and gender and all those kinds of things impact their teaching. It's not that we don't teach it here, but it's not a really diverse setting around here. So anyway, if understanding more about race and all those different diversity markers are important for people in diverse settings, I think it's still important to understand about and to teach about race even in predominantly white schools. So because that's my geographic context here, and because I do think that's important, I decided to set up a research study that would help move that dialogue forward. Because I think a lot of white teachers, a lot of white people want to talk about race or teach about race. You would have to be politically in, a bomb shelter somewhere to not understand that race is important, especially right now in the United States. Okay, so there's no denying that it's important, but I don't think teachers necessarily feel prepared to teach about it. What we do is use multicultural picture books and create questions for students at varying age levels, and of course teachers will be the ones that will help figure out are these appropriate for my students. So we use the Coretta Scott King for African American books, Pura Belpre for Latino, Latina. There's an Asian American Youth Literature Award, American Indian Youth Literature Award. So there's all these different awards for racial groups that teachers might not know about. So I developed a website, and we use the award winners so that it's not me picking books, through my frames and my lenses and that kind of thing, and saying that these are good books to teach from. These are those particular racial groups that are saying, we say these are really good quality books that represent us as a people. Teachers, for the most part, really embraced that. They were able to have some really honest dialogues with their students. One teacher taught 2 books that had to do with, this was in a 5th grade, that had to do with slavery. She said not only was she surprised that most of her students didn't really know what slavery was. They thought that they didn't know it had to do with race. They didn't know that slaves were property, and they didn't know that they weren't just like hired help. Right? So, but some of the students had family members who had been slaves. And so this was a way for them to be able to say in a real legitimate way, well, yes, slavery does exist. It's not just in this book, and these are some of my family's experiences. And it brought it up to even current day, where then some of the students were able to talk about their experiences, they and their families not being waited on in restaurants. There was one boy who said, I have Confederate soldiers in my background. Now, I feel really horrible about that. Does this mean I'm a bad person? So she was able to talk about, well, you didn't create this system. You didn't live back in that historical time. So, we need to look at this historical period for honestly what it is. We need to look at today for honestly what it is, but we need to take ownership of what we can change. So that's the, the advocacy and the action part of it, what you can change, not walking around with white guilt.
If you know the ending of the story of King Arthur, you might remember that it all ends up in tragedy. Terrible. The thing is, though, it isn't really, because if you look, there are many, many versions of the story of King Arthur, and it was the biggest fan fiction of the Middle Ages. Version after version after version came out. And if you look at Malory's, what you find is that there are real subtle things Sir Thomas Malory did to make the ending a little bit better. So, for example, there's still a stable kingdom at the end. One of Arthur's relatives finally takes over, restore order. Great. We still have an England that's moving along. Other versions have conquerors come in and just destroy everything. Malory doesn't use that version. He just has Mordred die. Mordred has no sons, and so that rebellion is over, and there's nobody to carry it on. So one of the things I realized that if you look at all the subtle things in the text about the choices Malory made from all the versions that were available to him, and he read French and Latin, so there were a lot of, versions available to him. He actually made some choices that kept the ending more optimistic than it could have been. There is stability. There is a hope that King Arthur will return again. There is not another generation of continued rebellion. Lancelot is allowed to live out his life in peace as a religious hermit. So it looks grim, but it's not. And it is grim in many ways, but it's not totally grim. And so when we look at political situations today, a lot of people will say, oh, this is horrible. This is the end of the world. This is a terrible situation. And if you keep looking, a lot of times you find out that it's not. And in Mallory's case, he chose to take a slightly more optimistic path than other people in his period about the ending of Arthurian legend.
For this year, for myself personally, I'm always doing continuing education to maintain my certification as a certified pediatric nurse practitioner. And as far as the department is concerned, we maintained our listing in the Princeton Review as a great school for nursing. And we also have been ranked 5th in the state as far as our baccalaureate program. So the baccalaureate program for nursing here at ONU is a 4-year program, and it's intensely driven by clinical experiences, which the sophomore students start to go out to the hospital settings in their sophomore year. And they continue to have semester clinical experiences, and then at the end of their capstone experiences, they actually spend 210 clinical hours in a clinical facility that we have a partnership with. Anytime that you're speaking to prospective students, it's important to try to list the reasons why they should be coming to ONU or why ONU is different from some other schools. So the Princeton Review ranking we're proud of because our students are giving that feedback once they leave the program, that we have been supportive and helped them move forward. The other indicator for us is an NCLEX exam. So having a baccalaureate degree does not mean anything in nursing if a person is unable to pass an NCLEX state board. So for us, our passage rate is over 95%, and that's better than the state and the national average. So those are two things that would really bring us and help us talk to students about why ONU. The next events for the program coming up at this time of year is preparing for our pinning ceremony, and also we have a trip to the Dominican Republic that will be happening as soon as school finishes here with Northern Nurses Without Borders.